Hey, it's Kat, and I'm back because what once was will be again. And I've got my thinking cap on because we're going to use history to divine the mysteries of the Game of Thrones and foretell its future. Well, actually, its past. So, in this episode, I want to talk about the upcoming Battle of the Bastards between Ramsay Bolton and Jon Snow. We're going to talk about who they are in history and whether there's going to be a great northern conspiracy. So setting this up, we have Ramsay in Winterfell. He's taken the throne of the north. Brandon and Rickon were allegedly killed by Theon. He presented everybody a couple of bodies and said they were them. And now most everybody thinks that they're dead or they're gone someplace else. Definitely Brandon's out there in the wild, and we saw that Rickon was brought back as a hostage or something. And we see Jon Snow was up at Castle Black thinking about how he was going to put together an army. He had about 2,000 wildlings at his disposal, and they were figuring out which little houses that they could pull together a number of forces and create a much bigger army. And we had Sansa up there pushing him on, because at first Jon Snow was not interested or very questionable about whether he wanted to do anything else after having been killed. Or was he? But in any event, where they are in history right now is this is going to be a replay of the Battle of Bosworth field between Richard III and Henry Tudor, soon to be Henry VII. So in history, Ramsay has all the Shakespearean attributes of Richard III minus the hump. He's got sort of his evil connotations. Richard III had a very poor reputation. He did not have a good story or somebody like Tyrion to write it for him. In fact, everybody believed that Richard III was responsible, and probably was, for the death of the two princes in the tower. And he also, Richard III had caused his brother to be drowned in a vat of Malmsey wine. So everybody was very certain that despite Richard III being a quote-unquote able administrator, he did have this aspect to him where he would just do freaking dirty deeds just to get done what he needed to do. Now, there's a theory that getting rid of the princes was a good idea because they would be repeating Henry VI, who was the Mad King in England, where they were two young potential rulers who would be under the power of somebody, and there would be this power struggle for being regent until they reached their majority. So some people think that he did a good deed, but you know, there's this taint about just slaughtering children. It's one thing when a bunch of adults go to war and they decide to kill each other, but it's quite another to slaughter young children, even if they're heirs, potential heirs to the throne. So Jon Snow, he has all the background aspects of Henry Tudor, soon to be Henry VII. As we all know, Jon Snow is considered to be a bastard. And in history, Henry Tudor wasn't a bastard, but he definitely came from a questionable line of legitimacy. His grandmother was Catherine Valois. Catherine Valois, who had been married to Henry V and who was actually the mother of Mad King Henry VI. And after Henry V died, men moved in, took over her son. She was pretty much left alone. Now, Henry V had appointed a butler to her establishment. His name was Owen Tudor. And unlike what we perceive of butlers today, butlers were very powerful in the royal household. I mean, they really controlled all the money, the food, the clothing that was coming in and out, who came to see the royalty, etc. And he had been appointed that because he had actually saved Henry V's life while they were in France. So he and Catherine after Henry V died and she was pretty much left alone with no children, they developed a relationship. There's a story about whether they met during a party and he was dancing and he fell down and his head landed in her lap, or she saw him swimming naked. Either one of these is kind of a romantic, and you could tell that somebody later was writing one of those great stories. They fell in love. They may or may not have gotten married because the queen, as the Dowager Queen, it was dangerous for her to get married because that would create another power struggle. So they might have gotten married in secret because the law simply did not allow for that to happen. In any event, they had 3 children, Edmund, Jasper, and Owen, or it might have been Jasper, Edmund, Owen. But as they went along, she did attempt to get in touch with Henry VI, and the men in power thought that she would be a bad influence because she was French. And they ended up arresting her and putting her in the tower, in an abbey, and they arrested Owen and threw him in the tower. The 2 children were left with Catherine de la Pole. Catherine Valois gave birth to her last child, Owen, while she was locked in this abbey, and she died while giving childbirth. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Lyanna Stark. Owen was eventually was allowed out of the tower. He got his 2 sons back, and they went to the court of Mad King Henry VI. He wasn't quite mad then. He recognized his 2 brothers as legitimate and gave them titles, and then he gave Edmund the heiress Margaret of Beaufort, whom our friend Sansa is playing right at this moment. So everybody plays a lot of different characters in history to move along events. So Margaret Beaufort was only 12 years old when she married Edmund, and he immediately impregnated her because he didn't want anybody to be able to dissolve their union and try to take her, because she was a very wealthy heiress. So he did, but then he soon after died because the battle between the red and the white roses was still going on. So he died, and Margaret gave birth, and Jasper, his brother, became a bit of a guardian. But Margaret was married 4 more times, and she ended up but having no other children because the birth of her son, Henry Tudor, prevented her from giving birth to anybody else. So Jon has all these aspects. His mom was in the tower. We're pretty sure it was Lyanna Stark. Although I will say right now that I don't agree that Rhaegar Targaryen was his father, just because the story that his line of the story does not compute. Catherine Valois' lover/husband was an unknown person. Owen Tudor was just some dude. Yes, he'd been a captain in the army. Yes, he'd saved Henry V's life, and he'd probably been somewhat of a friend, because after you save somebody's life, I don't think the king would forget you, which is why he'd gotten such a plum position, being like about nobody in the first place. So I believe that the father of Jon Snow, if indeed his mother is Lyanna Stark, is somebody completely unknown, or somebody that nobody's talked about yet. And there might be a case for the hedge knight from the infamous tourney whom she protected, and that everybody believes was a Reed, who were closest to the children of the forest and are thought to have been pretty decent wargs themselves. So I want you to think about that for a second. So this is part 1. Who is Jon Snow's father based on history? That doesn't mean Mr. Martin can't do whatever the hell he wants to do, but I believe that is going to be the case. We're going to discover that Jon Snow's father is somebody we totally do not expect to be, if his mother is Lyanna Stark. Then that would mean that Daenerys may be either who they say she is, or she could be somebody else. And we will talk about that in the next, but let's think about that. Richard III Henry Tudor, Margaret Beaufort. This is the battle that's being set up. And we're going to go on the next video, the Great Conspiracy. Is it or is it not going to happen?